Daniel, I'm ditching the normal intro today. I'm getting rid of it.
Is that true?
I'm going to try something on a little different, see how I like it.
It appears you have. Okay.
I am Ty Hildebrand. He's Dan Rubenstein. This is the Solid Verbal. Today, we are talking all things Oklahoma State with Scott Wright of the Oklahoman. Scott, very gracious with his time, is covering a lot of things all at once in the Oklahoma State athletics universe, and thankfully was able to work us into his schedule. So we're going to play that interview, which we've pre-recorded here momentarily.
Mm-hmm.
If you are new to the podcast, hit follow, hit subscribe. That way you get all of our episodes on whatever your chosen platform is. We appreciate it. We're going to continue doing episodes like this, looking at individual teams, trying to get a little bit more informed about, will it ever happen for so-and-so? The it, of course, is very relative in this conversation, Dan. It at Penn State may mean something different at Oklahoma State, but hopefully Scott can help us suss all that out.
Sorry, I wasn't paying attention to anything you said. I was. I know what you were saying. With Scott Wright is going to be terrific, I'm sure. I was looking up Pistol Pete because I want to make a proclamation that Pistol Pete is the elite of the elite in terms of college mascots. And I both love the idea that Pistol Pete has the giant head because he looks sort of like has like the weird expression of the Burger King in the commercials, but also kind of lament that there isn't a Pistol Pete person like we have the Mountaineer and we have the Leprechaun because they would look so good. And then I discovered that it's based on a real person.
It is based on a real person.
Did you do a TikTok about this?
I did a TikTok about this. Maybe I'll revive it. Frank Eaton was the guy's name. He was a dude named Frank from Connecticut who was at a parade.
Oh, my God.
He was at a parade in Stillwater, and they decided that they felt he had the right vibe that they were going for. Students liked his vibe, and they asked him to be the model for the new mascot. And so 30 years after that, he sort of like, for the next 30 years after that, I should say, he assumed the role of like the original Pistol Pete. And now he's kind of like this big symbol for not only Oklahoma State, but
it's so
sort of
good.
the Old West as a whole. Yeah, it's great.
Have you seen the Oklahoma State shirts? And I don't know if any other school does this to this degree, that it's Pistol Pete competing in the sport.
Yes.
So an Oklahoma State wrestling shirt doesn't just say Oklahoma State wrestling. It's Pistol Pete in a singlet, like the fishing team, the baseball team. It's Pistol Pete in a windup. And the brilliance of that, it seems so simple and obvious that like, why doesn't Oregon have this? Why doesn't Notre Dame have this? Why isn't, the Clemson Tiger? Maybe it is. Maybe the Clemson Tiger is doing something like this. But the Oklahoma State branding to me is A+ in terms of merch, in terms of having Pistol Pete up front, even like the Pistol Pete helmets, those white helmets with Pistol Pete.
Oh, they're awesome.
It's elite of the elite. And I tip my cap for Oklahoma State, especially the football team. And they have the different color uniforms and the different helmets. And, they're one of the more creative teams in terms of uniforms. But that they leaned into sort of cleaning up the retro look, I think they've just, I can't say enough good things about the Oklahoma State look. So
it's great.
That's what I think about initially. And like, while you're talking, that's where just my brain goes.
Yeah, no, Pistol.
An old Connecticutian with a mustache.
Pistol, back in the 1920s, they found him at a parade, and it sort of took off from there. Great history. This is what you find the deeper you go into some of these college football traditions and mascots and nicknames. Most of it happened by accident, which I think adds to the charm. We already know there's a lot of charm with this, but the fact that most of these things truly happened on a whim, that's great. That is our jam here, if anything, on the Solid Verbal.
Yeah.
So look, with respect to the actual football team,
which has taken a back seat to a mustachioed dude wearing chaps.
Rightfully so. The people who have listened to this show for a long time know that I have been on this roller coaster with Oklahoma State. 1 minute, I don't like where the program's headed. After the bye week last season, I loved it. I was betting on Oklahoma State. I've had this love-hate thing go on with the state of the program, the trajectory it feels like it's on, Mike Gundy. Forget what I think about anything. That doesn't matter. We have an expert on the show today who can help us figure all of that out. Again, his name is Scott Wright. You can find his fine work over at the Oklahoman. First time on the podcast. Scott, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for working us in. I know you're quite busy down there trying to cover all things Oklahoma State athletics. So we appreciate it. Look, this is going to be Mike Gundy's 20th year, I believe. If you make it that far, you're somewhere on the spectrum of revered on one side and maybe wearing out your welcome on the other. How does the fan base feel in this moment about Mike Gundy?
Where's the needle ticking?
The state of play with Oklahoma State?
He's exactly in that space that you just described. There is a large portion of the fan base that is incredibly appreciative of what he's done with this program. They understand the challenges that he has faced, and let's I can't put it all on Gundy because he did come along right as Boone Pickens was donating lots and lots of money to this program, building a new stadium, all of that. But Gundy was the perfect guy to come to Oklahoma State and stay. There was a real concern that Oklahoma State might become a stepping stone job. We saw before Gundy, Les Miles gets Oklahoma State going, and then boom, he's off to LSU after just a few years. Gundy, his phrase was, "This is my New York Yankees job." He wanted to be here. This was the perfect place for him. He loves it here. So all of that coming together made him the perfect guy at the perfect time to be able to do what they needed to do with the money that Boone Pickens and other donors were bringing into the program to be able to build what they built here. He's the greatest coach in Oklahoma State history by far. But at the same time, he does have that side of the fan base, and they're very vocal that feel like he's done all he can do at Oklahoma State, and they need somebody else to take them to the next step. Whether it's whatever it might be, just getting them beyond what they've become, where they have some 10-win seasons here and there, get kind of in the talk about some national stuff and end up coming up short. So it's very split, but there is a lot of understanding, particularly from the fan base that was around for the 80s and 90s in the post Barry Sanders era, when they went on probation and were miserably bad for a long time. There's a lot of those people that understand the value of what Mike Gundy has done at Oklahoma State.
So here's my two-part question, Scott. A, what does quote unquote next level, or if we say, will it happen for Oklahoma? What is the next level? What does that represent to you? Is it, as you mentioned, truly getting into the national conversation? Is it now winning the Big 12? Is it getting into the playoff? Is it all of the above? When I say that relative to Oklahoma State, what does that mean for you as someone who covers the team?
A lot of it is Big 12 titles. That's one thing that a lot of the disgruntled side of the fan base point to because they won one in his entire tenure. There were some other years when they would have gotten into a championship game had there been one, but they weren't there when they could win it all. They've made now 2 of the last 3 title games. And this new Big 12 obviously going to have a chance, I think, to compete on a regular basis. But that's the first thing. And now with the 12-team playoff, that's going to put you in a really good position going into the postseason. And then we'll see how the conversation changes with this playoff and how accepting Oklahoma State fans are of getting to the playoff versus going all the way and winning a national championship, or at least competing for one. Obviously the most successful season in Mike Gundy's tenure was the Brandon Weeden, Justin Blackman year, when they ended up being just outside the top 2. If there had been a 4-team playoff, they would have been in, but there wasn't one that year. So they end up just outside. They go and beat Andrew Luck and Stanford in the Fiesta Bowl in a fantastic game. And, that was a team they felt they had that could compete with anybody in the country. And they haven't had a team quite like that since. So we'll see, being at that level on a more consistent basis would be something that I think Oklahoma State fans really desire.
Part 2 of my question, in terms of getting to that next level, what's been holding them back? Is it a coaching and or talent thing? Or there's a very strong case to be made that it's been the Oklahoma Sooners holding them back, as they've been in the same conference and engaged in this rivalry forever. Mike Gundy, I think, is 4-15 against Oklahoma in his time in Stillwater. So Where are you at on that spectrum in terms of the thing keeping Oklahoma State from achieving higher heights?
I come down more on the side of the Bedlam rivalry being the roadblock because of Gundy's lack of success in that game. Now he closed it out with a couple of wins in the last 3 years that were really big for this program. And you look, he beats Oklahoma in 21 and 23, and he goes and plays for the Big 12 title both years. So there's a lot of correlations to that and his success. A lot of fans are bothered by his recruiting methods because he's not a guy that wants to go out and spend a lot of money and a lot of resources chasing 4 and 5-star guys that he doesn't know are really going to be happy in Stillwater. Stillwater's a remote city. It's it's an hour from Oklahoma City, an hour from Tulsa. A little bit of a country town, a little bit of a small town feel. Takes a certain type of player to be happy in Stillwater, and he understands that, and so he's willing to go out and find the 3-star or even the low 3-star that he feels like he can develop. That's been the thing that he has done incredibly well over his time is to not have a great recruiting class necessarily, but find guys that fit his program, find guys that he thinks he can develop, and he's done that incredibly well too. So a lot of the fan base gets really, really riled up on signing day because they might be in the 30s or the 40s or even the 50s like they were last year. And that's bothersome to them, but that's been his strategy his entire career. And he's made it work. When you compare his recruiting classes to his overall success, his method really is working. So, there's always the argument that, hey, if you were recruiting 4-stars and then making them better, you would be even better too. But
right.
he has a method and a plan that seems to work for him, and it's hard to argue with the results.
So when you look at the recent years of Oklahoma State, I think it's been marred by inconsistency, right? When the defense is incredible under Jim Knowles, the offense, I don't think the offense has had like a top 40 scoring offense, or I look at points per drive, since like 2018. I think it was Taylor Cornelius was when the offense last really popped. And Mike Gundy, offensive guy, offensive background, played quarterback for Oklahoma State, obviously. In terms of diagnosing what has gone wrong for this offense with experienced quarterbacks, playmaking receivers, running backs, Ollie Gordon was one of the best in the country last year. Is there anything that you can point to as to why this offense hasn't broken through these last 5-6 years?
It's really interesting. You had the Brandon Weeden run and then the Mason Rudolph run, and they were ridiculously good on offense. And then in the aftermath of that, Taylor Cornelius was he was a former walk-on who was a 5th-year senior and didn't get as much credit, I think, for being as good as he was. People didn't realize it at the time.
They'll take Taylor Cornelius this year, without a doubt. Yeah,
exactly right. So then you came in with Spencer Sanders after that, and Sanders was intensely competitive and uniquely talented, but also he was in that area of competitiveness where he always thought he could make a better play than he maybe could. And so his interception numbers rose a lot, and that led to some of the inconsistencies that the offense has faced prior to last year, during his tenure. He won a lot of games at Oklahoma State and did a lot of good things. Obviously, it ended awkwardly for him, and he goes out to Ole Miss and all of that. But there was that part of his inconsistency. They didn't have really the star receiver that they had relied on. They had some really good ones, but they didn't have the James Washington, Justin Blackman, Tyler Wallace type of guy to rely on in the passing game. They dealt with some injuries on the offensive line and things like that. But when the defense got really good under Knowles, particularly his last 2 seasons, Gundy became very comfortable with the idea of slowing the game down, shortening the game, let the defense win games for them. And for a good portion of those 2 years, it worked really well. That 12-win season in 2021, that was the majority of their games, was how they won games, was with really good defense. So then you go from that and into, then all of a sudden you're changing defensive coordinators. You had Derek Mason for a year. Now Bryan Nardo coming up from Division II, trying to learn learn how to coach at this level, but also teach a new and unique scheme with the 3-3-5 from Iowa State. So it's been a weird blend of things, and obviously with Ollie Gordon, like you mentioned, he brought some consistency to the offense. They had the weird portion in the first 3 games where Gundy was rotating quarterbacks 4 series at a time, and it was got them off to a rocky start. And they really settled in once they finally went with Alan Bowman and being the focus of the being the quarterback, and Ollie Gordon being the focus of the offense. I think they found something that they can build on for this year to make them more consistent. But now you're dealing with a defense that is, outside of the top 100 in most of the important categories.
So last year, post bye week, I think Oklahoma State wins 7 of 8, 5 in a row after losing the South Alabama, and I want to say it was Iowa State
Correct.
game. Iowa State, it was Rocco Becht putting a bunch of points and really succeeding through the air against this Oklahoma State defense early. They turned things around after the bye week. What clicked? What changed? What was added to? What was taken away from? And whatever that was, and we're asking you to define the word that and it all these times. Is it replicable, the momentum? And certainly, obviously, the Big 12 championship game didn't go the way that Pokes fans would have wanted. But is there that ability to recapture the momentum post-bye week last year moving forward?
I think there is. Doing it consistently is going to be a little bit tricky because everybody knows about Ollie Gordon now. That was a little bit of a sneak attack early in that run because the first 3 games during non-conference, he had 19 carries for like 120 yards. So you got to Iowa State, and finally they not only do they start handing him the ball on a regular basis, they also tweaked the offense, got rid of some of the zone read stuff because they realized how much better he was when you just get him running straight at the offensive line rather than going sideways when you're faking the handoff or handing off to him. So they tweaked that, got him moving toward the offensive line, toward the line of scrimmage to start his runs, and he exploded. Alan Bowman settled in as the full-time quarterback at that point. So you have a lot of that you can build on, but people are going to be gearing to take away Ollie now this season in the way that you kind of saw down the stretch last season. It's going to be even more this year. They realize that when you pressure Alan Bowman, you can force him into some errors. He threw 14 interceptions, which was by far the most in his career, and that was when he was, he had 3 years at Texas Tech where he's throwing the ball.
He's 37 years old.
Exactly. Yes.
He's got to learn by now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, So you've got a lot of things you can build on. You've got good receivers that they really like. One of the big weapons that they found late in the season that they were really happy with. They've known Brennan Presley was good for a while, but
sure,
literally throwing him the ball 15 times a game and letting him do what he can do to get the ball outside and open things up for Ollie in the middle. So there are some things that they can build on, and with all but 2 starters basically back on this offense, there's a lot of room, I think, to build on what they did last year.
And yeah, as you mentioned, the offense is ahead of the defense. This was a defense that struggled, especially giving up a lot of big plays through the air, which is kind of crazy to see after what we saw under Jim Knowles the couple years before. The amount, they pressured the quarterback and stuck to receivers. Is there star power on this defense? Is there a unit that looks to be well ahead of other units? Is there a linebacker, a safety, a defensive tackle, somebody like that who is, anchoring things to build around? Or is this a team that is going to have to rely on Ollie Gordon, Brennan Presley, get them the ball however you can to win games?
There are some guys on the defensive side, and they're trying to figure out how to best use them right now. Spring was really big for that because, a year ago in spring, the defense was all about learning Bryan Nardo's system. And then as the season went on, they started realizing that some of their guys could do some different things, a little bit that fit a little bit better. So this spring was more about adjusting to their personnel. For instance, Collin Oliver, he was one of the big pass rushers on that 2021 team, even as a true freshman, had another good year in 22. 23, they move him to an outside linebacker spot in this 3-3-5, and he was good, but but they limited his ability on the pass rush. So this spring they implemented a lot more 4-man front. We'll see how much they're actually going to use it. I think it'll be pretty significant, but that gets him up on the edge and lets him do what he's best at, because his ability off the edge is incredible. Along with that, Kendall Daniels has he's been a really good safety for this team, been a very physical guy, kind of learning the position, and he's really just kind of outgrown safety. He showed up for spring at 6'4", 230, and you can't do a lot with a safety like that that's so physical. You needed him closer to the line of scrimmage to really take advantage of his top skill set. So they started messing around with him in a linebacker role. So you get those two guys as kind of your outside linebackers, with Oliver as a little bit of an edge rusher. Nick Martin was the big surprise of this team last year at middle linebacker. Ended up having most tackles in Oklahoma State history dating back to 1984 when they were playing some really good defense. Wow. So you look at that linebacker group, with Daniels being a guy that they'll play there sometimes, and he can still play that middle safety in this defense and be effective. He's just not a guy that you don't want him lined up on a slot. I'll say that. So you can do some different things with him now and kind of adjust to his skill set. The defensive line, I think, is the biggest key. The most important thing for this team is getting back to really pressuring the quarterback. What they did under Jim Knowles was pretty remarkable. I'm not saying they've got to be back to that level, but they've got to get back to getting real pressure on the quarterback. And, I think that helps out the secondary. You look at a lot of the big plays that the secondary allowed last year. It was times when a quarterback was allowed to scramble around and make a play. So you limit that time for the quarterback in the pocket, and I think you help out your secondary a ton.
One more point on that, Scott. I remember when they brought Bryan Nardo down from a small college in Erie, Pennsylvania, there were comparisons drawn immediately to Mike Yurcich, who also came from a small college in Pennsylvania. Do they feel like they have found their Mike Yurcich of the defense after seeing what Bryan Nardo put out there in year one, or is it still sort of a work in progress in your view?
In some ways, it's still a work in progress. In general, they really like Bryan Nardo's mind and the way that it works. They feel like he is a really intelligent football coach. And there were a lot of times you can go back and look at several games last year where they were giving up, they were getting burned early. Kansas is one that sticks out to me. They gave up a score early in the second half and then shut them out the rest of the game, allowed the offense to get back in, come back and win that game. BYU was a similar thing where they couldn't stop them at all early, shut them out the entire second half, got that game until they hit a field goal to tie it and force overtime. But so his in-game adjustments were really good in that respect. They like his intelligence, his understanding, and now we're seeing him evolve his defense to fit the talent that he's got. So this will be a really telling year from that respect. You don't want to bail on a guy after 2 years and say that he can't do it, but this is going to be really important for him with so many returning starters and so many experienced guys now that understand his defense. You should see real progress in year two with Bryan Nardo, and that's going to be the most important thing for him.
Back to Gundy for a second. I read a quote of his from, I want to say last fall, Scott, where he emphasized the importance of investing in NIL over facilities, which has kind of been the trend at Oklahoma State forever. His quote at the time was, "Don't build it, put it in the bank." And then a few sentences later, quote, "I'm not saying I agree with it.
Hold on.
I only know the sign of the times," end quote. So a little bit of a conflict there. This is clearly a program that has known how to use Boone Pickens money for betterment, to catapult itself, at least in terms of facilities and national prominence, what have you. Is it evolving quickly enough on the NIL front now that the game has sort of changed?
They made some pretty significant changes after a really rough offseason between 2022 and 23. They had a ton of guys leave. They had to get a little bit desperate to keep some of their stars, some of these guys that we've talked about, to keep them around because a lot of guys were heading out the door. And that led them to finally being more proactive in how they're approaching NIL in particular. Um, Mike Gundy is still old school in a lot of respects. He hates NIL, he hates the portal, but he understands that he has to use them to survive. He still likes his job, so he's trying to keep it. So he's come around to using them, even though he doesn't like them. Now, the transfer thing, he likes to talk about it and act like he doesn't like it, but as soon as the grad transfer rule came in back in, what was that, 2015, 2016, he was very prominent in grabbing some guys through that came in and really helped Oklahoma State. So he's not afraid of transfers. He just doesn't like when his really good players hang around for a couple of years and then bail. So that said, he's becoming much more proactive through him and his staff, and then also through the collective to be much more accepting of what the current landscape is. And that has allowed them to keep, listen, by mid-October last year, there were people around here writing, who's Ollie Gordon going to play for next year?
Right.
So the pressure was on right away for Oklahoma State to make, make sure they were taking care of their guys. And they're doing a much better job of that. We'll see if they can continue that going forward. But, had they been more in this current mode, the 2022 offseason, I don't think would have been nearly as bad when they had, I forget the numbers. It was probably 15 to 20 guys that bailed in the portal. So, they've definitely taken steps in the right direction.
What you're describing is essentially a less stubborn version of Dabo Swinney.
A little bit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's how it feels.
I've been critical of Oklahoma State in the past. Dan knows this. Anybody who listens to the show knows it. But to be clear, I'm a big fan of the opportunity in front of them starting this year because both Oklahoma and Texas leave the conference. It does feel from afar a little like the Big 12 has fallen off the back of a truck. And it's just kind of there. Like whoever wants to go out and claim it can go out, can claim it, because it feels like maybe the most wide open conference in college football. The schedule is not easy, but I would say definitely easier than it's been with both Texas and Oklahoma on it. The path is now wider into the playoffs, as we described earlier. Is this a moment for Oklahoma State that they recognize? Like, how are they treating this moment in time in the football program? Because it seems like amid everything else changing, for them just standing pat and doing what they do may put them at an advantageous spot.
Yeah, they absolutely understand what they're walking into, and it was really interesting because everything that happened with OU and Texas coincided with that 2021 season that Oklahoma State had, and it was like, oh, here they are, they've already arrived, they're going to be the torchbearer of the new Big 12 when OU and Texas are gone. Then 2022 was a really rough year. It was like, well, maybe it's not so. I literally after 2021, I was writing about how OSU and Baylor were gonna be the long-standing rivalry at the top of the Big 12, right. And then they both had horrible 22 seasons. So, but Oklahoma State bounced back. Obviously, this is going to be a challenging conference, not in the way that it was with OU and Texas, but in the way of there's not a bad team in this conference. Right. There's not going to be a week off. You always used to have Kansas that everybody looked forward to the quote unquote bye week of playing the Jayhawks to win 56-3 and get some guys healthy and move on down the road. And that doesn't exist in this league anymore. We'll see if maybe there turns out to be somebody that falls into that role, but it's hard to envision that right now. So it's going to be very challenging. There's going to be years probably where 2 or 3 losses is going to get you not only in the title game, you might win the title and be the king of the hill for that year. So it's going to be a really fun conference to watch. It's going to be challenging to get through week to week. But to answer your question, yes, Oklahoma State does understand the situation that they're in and what is at their feet if they can capitalize on it and maintain a level of consistency that keeps them in that spot from a year-to-year basis.
we've talked about a number of the changes facing the sport, obviously, which faces Oklahoma State, new Big 12, NIL, transfer portal. Obviously, there's things happening right now in DC with the House bill. Like, how much gas does Mike Gundy have left in the tank? As somebody who is sort of a self-proclaimed traditionalist and is trying to adapt to the times, we're also in an era where a number of lifer coaches have said this is not necessarily a long-term thing for me, and they got into coaching to coach football and not worry about all the extraneous stuff. Does this feel at all like the end of the Gundy era in some respects, or does he seem as energized as ever?
He seems really energized right now, and I can't explain what exactly has sort of turned him since the 22 was a really rough year. 23 was obviously a great bounce back for them. So maybe it's as simple as that he there were a lot of guys on that 22 team that were not great locker room guys, and going back to 21 was maybe the most fun he has had as a coach based on the way he talks, because the guys on that team, particularly on that defense, were just so fun to coach. And then a lot of those guys were gone, graduated, and so 22, their leadership wasn't great. They had some locker room cancers that ended up leaving in the portal after that year, and they really rebuilt the culture pretty quickly for 23, and I think that he got back to having fun. Now, to answer your question, I really don't know, how long he's willing to do this. I sort of thought, his son Gunner was a redshirt sophomore last year. I sort of thought maybe he'd get through Gunner's career and then hang it up. But obviously Gunner now is in the portal and looking for a new place to play, which is not an unhappy situation. He wants to go play somewhere, and his chances of being the starter at Oklahoma State. He's a good player, but not quite ready to be the guy at Oklahoma State. So it's really hard to project with Mike Gundy. He's still got his farmland outside of Stillwater and loves to go and ride on his tractor and do all those things. And there could come a time when just out of nowhere, he all of a sudden decides he wants to go be a farmer, and that's it. So it's really hard to project with this guy.
What kind of positioning is Oklahoma State in? They haven't hired a new head football coach in 20 years, as we opened the show with. What is the state of that job? I'm not putting dirt on Mike Gundy's career, but eventually it will happen. How aligned are things behind the scenes to make this as attractive a job, which I think it is, as possible? And where do you think this job sort of stands in the greater Big 12 or national scene in terms of attractiveness and ceiling right now?
I think between the things that we talked about with Mike Gundy's longevity and the money that Boone Pickens and then others have brought into this program, I do think it's very attractive, and I think they've got really good leadership right now. Chad Weiberg at athletic director has, he's made a couple of hires now. He had a men's basketball, wrestling, which is a really big deal at Oklahoma State.
Sure.
So he's had some important hires to make now. He's only in his third year now, coming into his third year on the job. So to get a couple of those experiences, I think will be valuable for him whenever it comes time to replace Mike Gundy. So, I do think this is a program that has good vision from its leadership, a good understanding of what they can be. So I think they'll be in a good spot, but the danger is always going to be with Oklahoma State, at least at the point, the way the landscape is right now, with the SEC and Big Ten being what they are, that you always have to worry that you get a guy that's just looking to move on and go on somewhere else after 4 or 5 successful years at Oklahoma State. So that'll be the big thing they've got to try to guard against in the future.
The Pokes finish the season in Boulder. How do we begin a wrestling-style rivalry between Mike Gundy and Deion Sanders when you have two of the biggest personalities in the sport, combative, electric, How do we lay the groundwork so that people cannot stop reading your articles about this feud that we are going to start right here on the show between Mike Gundy and Deion Sanders?
Listen, the Big 12 has got to get on board with this. They've already messed up the Big 12 media days. They have them. There's 2 days, and they have them on separate days. Why do you not have both of those guys in the building together the very first day that you're introducing this brand new conference? It's a missed opportunity. I'm looking forward to how this goes. And Gundy is one of those guys that loves to be a little bit subtle, not quite as subtle as he thinks with things that he says in the media. So when Coach Prime is running on about things, Gundy's going to want to comment, and it's going to be fantastic. It's just going to be so exciting to have those two guys. From every story that I've written that like from the time the schedule was released or when they just announced the opponents, every headline has included Deion Sanders and Mike Gundy in the headline, just so people are aware that this is going on.
I think you need to start making up quotes, and you need to start ethically throwing out everything you've learned and everything that you need to adhere to legally for your newspaper. It's time to just turn this into a full WWE situation, and you are at the middle of it. I think this is the new move. Don't take any of my advice. It's all terrible. Sorry, Ty, go ahead.
I'm fired up for this.
Scott, yeah. Dan brings up the end of the schedule. The first half of the schedule is quietly kind of tough.
It is.
Utah at home, K-State on the road in that first month of the season. You add in West Virginia. There's an Arkansas game in there, and a season opener against the reigning FCS national champ South Dakota State. As you look at the schedule, and this is not a schedule preview, this is not a team preview, but which of those games maybe in the first half are blinking red lights for you as those games we need to watch a little bit more closely?
Well, as weird as it is to say, I mean, South Dakota State's coming in with a 29-game winning streak.
They're very good.
I mean, that is going to be, obviously this game was scheduled before that winning streak even started. It's been on the schedule for a few years now. So you had no idea they were going to be this good. I would say if Mike Gundy had the option, he would opt out of this game and get Arkansas Pine Bluff or somebody in town for that opener now. But that's going to be a fascinating game. The Arkansas rivalry kind of rebuilding here. That was a big deal back in the 80s. Rebuilding that there's a lot of excitement around that. But that Utah game and Kansas State game that you mentioned, both are very intriguing to me because those are two teams that I think are going to be there at the end of the year, and it's not going to feel like it's not going to feel like a mid-November game, but it's going to have the importance of that mid-November game playing for your spot in the Big 12 title game when you go up against those two teams. So I'm really intrigued by both of those. Kansas State is a team that has given Oklahoma State a lot of trouble lately. The 2022 game going up there and getting smacked around 48-0 when Oklahoma State was in the top 10 at that time, and that was the beginning of that season crumbling. So going up there is always tough for this program. So you look at those two games. I think if you made a list of the top 4 contenders for the Big 12 title, OSU, Utah, and Kansas State are probably all in there, and maybe you throw in Arizona. I don't know where Kansas. I can't make up my mind about Kansas yet. But yeah. So those are going to be really important games right out of the gate.
Last question. We have these 4 new fan bases. We've asked all of these the people representing the schools in these stories for food recommendations. We've got Arizona schools, Colorado fans, and Utah fans that will slowly be trickling into Stillwater. Just a warning. Where should they be eating? What should they be experiencing to enjoy their new conference mate? Now,
if you're talking about Stillwater, I've got to give. There's 2 recommendations I'm just required to throw out to you. Number 1 is Eskimo Joe's. It's kind of the
classic
college pub. It's going to be really packed on game days, but if you come in on a Friday, maybe try to check that out. I recommend the bacon cheeseburger and the cheese fries.
Great.
If you can't get in there, right around the corner from that is Hideaway Pizza. Fun fact about Hideaway Pizza, they've branched out around Oklahoman now, but the Stillwater location did not use the same. They did not share the crust recipe with all the branch locations. So the original Hideaway Pizza crust only available in Stillwater.
I love that.
And the third place that is not as well known that I always recommend to people is a place called Thai Loco. It's a little taco shop that does some Asian fusion things with some tacos that is fantastic.
All right, I've got a test now to see how deep into Oklahoma State you are. Is this baseball team only going to go as far as Brian Holiday and Sam Garcia can take them? Or is there something back half of this schedule to keep Oklahoma State going?
You know, if you had asked me that question at this time yesterday, I probably would have agreed. Then Carson Benj went out and pitched really well against Texas Tech last night. He's only made 3 starts all within the last month, and he's been really good. So if he gives them another good starter, I think they've got a chance to get a little bit farther. But they've had real trouble getting out of their own regional the last few years, so they've got to get things on track there.
Got to wake up the bats.
Exactly.
Oklahoma State. All right, he passed the test with flying colors. Scott Wright, thank you so much. Covers Oklahoma State for the Oklahoman. Thank you so much for all of your time. And I guess the actual final question is, will it ever happen for Oklahoma State? In your opinion, will it happen?
Just to be clear, is there a definition of it?
A Big 12 title in the new look Big 12. As you defined it,
yes.
Winning the Big 12 is the it for Oklahoma State.
Yes, I think it will happen. And I think they've got a really good chance this year. All the returning starters, defense making a move. I think that there's a good chance it happens this year.
Scott Wright, thank you so much for all of your time and insight.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Okay, Dan, there you go. Scott Wright, check him out at the Oklahoman. I like that you gave him a little impromptu baseball trivia there.
I wanted to get him with a gotcha, and I did not get him because he's great. Baseball team playing well. Hopefully it's a good stretch this spring for the Pokes on the baseball field. Can make their way to Omaha potentially. They're, I think, top 20-ish at time of recording, so maybe they can get on a roll here. Some good pitching, it appears. Would love to see it. Why not?
We'll see what happens. So full disclosure, we're recording this a little bit early. We don't have to record on Memorial Day, which is when we would normally record on a Monday. So we're doing this before the Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully nothing changes with the baseball program. Hopefully there aren't any gigantic breaking stories with Oklahoma State football, as it were. I feel like of the episodes we've done in this series, will it ever happen for whoever? We've had the good fortune of talking to many experts who are smarter about their respective teams than you and I. I feel like I got the most out of this one. And it's definitely. It's only because personally, as I described at the top of the show, I've been on this roller coaster with the Pokes where I just never really know how to feel about where things stand. But I thought his insight into how Gundy is treating the portal and NIL was super helpful to understand the ecosystem. I thought his understanding of how they are approaching this moment, they understand it's an opportunity given the state of play in the Big 12. That was really helpful to understanding, again, this ecosystem. I just feel like I came out of that learning a lot more than I did going in. So I'm grateful to Scott's time.
Yeah, and Oklahoma State, to me, has been a program defined by star power. And so that's why I was especially interested to hear what Scott had to say about it, because he's right that at receiver, when they have that go-to guy, that gravitational player like Junkyard Jim, James Washington most certainly was.
Yeah.
And they've had that guy at running back. Weirdly enough, they've had 2 of those guys recently that it's not the most efficient rushing attack, but when they get a little bit of space, they grab a lot of space in Ollie Gordon and Chuba Hubbard. Sort of the Bryce Love All-Stars. It's
right.
It's fun to see an Oklahoma State team, especially given what that stadium can look like when they're really strong. But yeah, the star power thing to me, and we'll see if Collin Oliver gets back to form now that he's back on the edge, because I remember great freshman year, a lot quieter last year. If they have the dudes, they're a contender. If they just have guys, they sort of get a lot quieter. And so it seemed like, as Scott mentioned, when Ollie Gordon got going last year, they rode that potential, they rode that star power, which was great to see.
Just on a personal level, again,
please,
with Oklahoma State, because it's been a ride for me.
This is 7-year Alan Bowman, by the way. I cannot believe we are still saying that name on the show.
British comedy legend Alan Bowman.
Yes.
The longest running joke maybe we've ever had on this show at this point. On a personal level, though, with Oklahoma State,
Yeah.
I was listening for signals, flags that would indicate to me whether my criticism of the program over the years has been justified or not. And what I got out of that is kind of yes. Kind of yes.
Right.
I feel more informed now, but kind of yes. And it seems like others within the fan base have also been there. Again, it's a tenuous balance between revered and wearing out your welcome. And as Scott alluded, Gundy's in there, and it depends who you talk to.
Yeah.
But this will be a pivotal year.
You can ask our wives.
We
are in that balance as well.
All the time, man. All the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
I get it. I empathize. Yeah, I was down on Oklahoma State last year. You were down on Oklahoma State last year. And
until the bye week, though. After the bye week, I was all in.
They beat the Kansas
State.
I think it was Kansas State.
It was Kansas State. They beat them on like a Thursday night. I remember watching that game.
Yeah.
Up in the room as I'm falling asleep, and I'm like, what is going on with this Oklahoma State team? It feels like a completely different version of what we had seen the first 3-4 weeks of the year, whatever it was. And from that point forward, I was in. But before that, I was approaching the Pokes with a healthy amount of skepticism.
Yeah. I mean, the Oklahoma State fans who know way more than we do about their own school, they were quick to say, like, as soon as you think Oklahoma State's down, that's when Gundy pulls out an 8-4, 9-3 year. And as soon as you think they're going to be good, that's when they go 6-6. And so that's, for better or worse, the Mike Gundy Oklahoma State experience, I suppose.
Well, Scott's in on him. He's in on him this year. That week 1 game, do not count out South Dakota State, the mighty Jackrabbits, who, as Scott said, are on a pretty good winning streak. So look forward to having him back at some point in the future.
Yeah.
It's great to get his perspective. Would obviously welcome your perspective out there, Mr. and Mrs. Verballerhood.
Sure.
Right? That's not a thing, but I just made
that. No, that was great. Roll with it.
Solidverbal@gmail.com is our email.
John Q. Verballer.
John Q. Verballer, thank you. You can write in on the email, solidverbal@gmail.com. Hit us up across all of our social media channels. We've been posting like crazy here in the off season, and we'll continue to rev things up the deeper we get into May and obviously through the summer. Hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of what we are doing. And of course, I'd be remiss if I did not mention our wonderful community of Verballers and passionate listeners out at verballers.com. VERBALLERS.com. You can access this episode, all of our episodes, a little bit early without the ads, get access to our Discord server, which has been just a great community to hang out and chat about all of these off-season topics that have been thrown about. We've got legalese that at some point we need to dive into and explain this whole House versus NCAA settlement that's going to, I think, have a pretty sizable impact on the sport that we love. We will save that for a time at some point in the very, very near future. But for now, for that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrandt, thanks for tuning in, downloading, supporting, and hopefully listening to all we offered you today. Talk to you in a few days. Stay solid.
Peace.